Kombat 2021. This will be the spoiler-free section, so don't worry. Anybody who hasn't watched the movie yet or whatever, again, I still have no idea how you still haven't because of, streaming, but I get it. Work, busy lives, whatever. So, spoiler-free thoughts at first. Starting off, it definitely was doing all the things that, a movie should do as far as kind of setting up the lore of this world, right? It does a little bit of one of those kind of, what's it called, red herrings, where it leads you off thinking that it's going to be about a certain character, and then it goes in a wildly different direction and shows that it's not. And so we get our main character, Cole Young, who is a character that is exclusive to this movie. My extensive research that I've done into this property has told me that, like, I know enough about all these characters except for that one guy, and then I was told, obviously, by people who actually know about Mortal Kombat that he is a character that is exclusive to the movie. He's got the typical hero's journey ahead of him overall that involves different Mortal Kombat characters, right? And at the risk of spoiling anything, the plot definitely kind of devolves into almost like TV pilot plot more than actual movie plot, in the sense of where the movie starts off, it's got this really awesome brisk pace to it, that a lot of things are happening, you're getting introduced to a lot of characters all at once, the action is already off to an amazing start, right? Because that, I think, is what we could say is the best part about this movie, is the action and the choreography overall, which again is what was promised, right? That's what these filmmakers know these fans and just a majority of the fan base come to see, right? They don't actually care about the story, right? They care about the fights. But guess what? As I said on my Godzilla vs. Kong review, you can't just have a 2-hour-long movie that's exclusively fights. This movie and Godzilla vs. Kong came certainly close, but at the end of the day, you still do need a story to push you forward. And while I can definitely say that the fights are just as awesome as they promised, and the action and the choreography is just as awesome as they promised, and it was so beyond satisfying to have a fight with, again, every big budget movie now is going to have CG in it. It's just kind of, modern day business economics in Hollywood. But it was so beyond refreshing to me to see a movie that actually relied on fight choreography with real people and not like an overextensive use of CG. That was definitely beyond refreshing. But the story, I will definitely say, kind of suffered from the idea of, this is Warner Brothers, so of course we have to set up 4 or 5 more sequels. And while this did not necessarily have... It was not necessarily as egregious as, say, as something like the Fantastic Beasts franchise, where it's like, oh, we literally have nothing here because we're saving all of our cards for the next movie. This did have something, but I can't necessarily say if it was justified having the 2-hour runtime, all right? And I feel like that's the most that I can say without directly spoiling anything else. So what's your kind of take on all that?
Yeah, no, I thought you kind of hit the nail on the head on a lot of those points. Yeah, so my spoiler-free thoughts are, it's a tricky beast because there was so much going for this movie that I really loved, right? I think it's pretty obvious. Everyone's going to say this, but look, if you like action, even if you're someone like me who's re-falling in love with action, realizing their disenfranchisement comes elsewhere, aka not just from, action films as a whole, but what we've been getting recently, this was refreshing because the action was... It served the plot, which the plot is a big issue, but it at least made sense why every character would sort of go head to head in certain situations. And it was so badass as well, sort of tapping into like Sub-Zero and using the icicle of blood and stabbing his 4,000-year-old archenemy. I mean, it was pretty gnarly. Heads were being squashed, like literally crushed in between hands.
Yeah.
This movie from the start really told you, hey, like if you're a little squeamish, buckle up because it's going to be a rocky ride for you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I really do. I think it needed to sort of find modernism in that sense where it couldn't go that far in the early, the early 90s installments, like I guess mid 90s rather. But I just think that they could have done that type of stuff, but it would have, I don't know if it would have translated as amazingly as it does now with CG and the way we're able to, I think too many people have spent time working on different various blood splatter plugins, but hey, I'm glad they exist in moments like this because this movie was awesome because of that. The special effects meets the practical.
Yeah, not to cut you off too. Can we just talk about that for a second? Like, just as far as the whole violence of it goes, because that's not a spoiler, right? It's the sense of where, like, obviously the biggest criticism of the original is that it had the PG-13 rating, so they couldn't obviously go into the fatalities and the blood that made the original kind of as good as it was. But like, you know how it is with like whenever that video game came out, I'm not the video game guy, so I'm totally off on my kind of timelines and dates and everything. But like, if I remember correctly, it only resulted in like a few blood splatters, right? And I'll definitely say that this is part of like my fault because I have been preconditioned because of the era of Hollywood that I grew up in, right? Which is where I am preconditioned where if it's gonna be blood splatter, it's gonna be like some kind of crazy alien blood
Thanks,
splatter, because
Tarantino.
that is just right. Because that is just how Hollywood works, right? As long as it's not human blood, you can go apeshit, right? But the difference being is that the violence that we saw before and the blood splatter that we saw before happened still kind of using old school film techniques. And I will say that as awesome as the violence was in this movie, they did the Deadpool thing where they had it all digital blood, and that definitely still has that sense of like kind of cartoonism to it. And it worked, I think, but especially given the fact that a majority of the deaths were happening to creatures and not real people, per se, there was definitely a level of kind of like confusion, I'll say, like a level of disconnect in my brain where it's like, oh, okay. You know? Like, did you get that at all? Or is that just me?
Well, I totally agree with you. Hollywood has no regard for green blood or blue blood or, purple blood. They just splatter that everywhere. And so for the first time we had that with like red blood, which, is assumed that's what, humans in any world cinematically not attached to ours, they still bleed red for the most part from what I've seen. So yeah, I thought it was cartoony and it was video gamey, but I thought it worked because I think look, this movie was always going to be a hard sell. It's going to be hard to get cinematic fans in the seats of this one. Action fans, sure, they mostly cross over with video game fans nowadays. Mortal Kombat, however, while it is one of, I'd say, the titans of the video game industry, look, you guys are going to come at me in the comments here. It's fallen off, okay? It's not in the same pristine place it used to be. All right, what are people talking about now? They're talking about Fortnite, Call of Duty, Halo. It was a big dog, man. It was one of the big games of like the late 80s, early 90s. It really was like a titan of the industry, but it's not that anymore. So like, I just don't know how much of the audience is younger. So this really was made for Mortal Kombat fans. So in that regard, for me as a cinema fan, yeah, it's silly. But for me as a video game fan and understanding, I think what you have to do to get butts in seats for this one, because the budget was pretty large, man. I mean, I haven't looked it up, but you could just tell, like, they really didn't spare
a
lot of expenses making this one. It's really stunning. It's visually really beautiful film. Like, it looks, the shots are really strong, I thought, which is crazy to say, but I guess there are some great names attached to it, like James Wan and all that type of stuff. Even though he was just producing, he has input. And so I think it worked, but for me personally, it's like my two sides of my brains are having an argument about if it worked, Yeah. So the last thing I was going to say is, before we kind of jump out of the spoiler free section, look, guys, don't go into this expecting for a Star Wars hero's journey type format. It is, I'd say, one of the poorer examples of the hero's journey. It's no Raya and the Last Dragon. It's fun. And if you're a Mortal Kombat fan, you are going to leave that movie with your jaw on the ground. And if you're maybe like a younger kid who likes violent video games and is with his friends, like, I think the audience is going to find this film, but I don't think this film is going to find an audience outside of who it's intended for. So
yeah, I agree with that per se. So that was our spoiler-free review. We're gonna jump more so into like kind of some of the more specifics, obviously. But let us know your thoughts on Mortal Kombat 2021 if you saw it so far on our spoiler-free review. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Be sure to also click the subscribe button and the bell next to the subscribe button. That way, you guys get notified every time we put up new content. We've got a couple more thoughts coming your way.